If you're watching this video, there's a good chance you're familiar with Chao. They first appeared on the Dreamcast in 1999 with Sonic Adventure and have been a massive fan favorite ever since. Sonic Adventure 2 expanded on the Chao system quite a bit when it was released, and Sonic Adventure 2 Battle on the GameCube expanded on it even further. It's basically the best version of the Chao Garden we ever received in any Sonic game to this day. My history with Chao dates back to when I was in elementary school. I had a GameCube, and while it wasn't my first console, it was definitely my favorite. Sonic Adventure 2 Battle was easily one of my most played games, and I would spend most of my time playing it in the Chao Garden hanging out with my Chao. My best and most favorite Chao ever was named Manny. He was a shiny white neutral Chao who reincarnated a few times and won me most of the emblems available from the Chao Garden. In this video, I aim to create a Chao even better than my childhood favorite Manny in Sonic Adventure 2 Battle on the GameCube. When I was younger, a lot of this stuff was just too complicated or difficult to come by, so I never really bothered. Now though, I have big plans. Before we get into it, I want to put up a couple disclaimers. First of all, I chose the GameCube version over one of the re-releases for a few reasons we'll get into later, but the primary reason was simply to keep things legitimate. On the PC release, which is what I would normally play nowadays, there's a very well-known Chao editor that I could easily abuse to create this video in like a day or two, and I wasn't about that. I wanted to do this as legitimately as possible, so GameCube it is. Secondly, when I say perfect Chao, I'm being a bit hyperbolic. A true perfect Chao would take hundreds of hours of resetting for perfect level up rolls, as well as some hardware I simply don't have access to right now, so when I say perfect, I'm referring to a Chao that has over 3,000 stat on every visible skill. With that out of the way, let's get started. In doing research for this video, I discovered that there are a very large number of potential Chao combinations. Colors, skill types, alignment, and stage of life all contribute to a Chao's appearance. When starting this Chao journey, I figured that choosing my favorite Chao based on appearance would be a straightforward, simple decision, but I was very wrong about that. I loaded up the 3D Chao viewer as well as the Chao Island wiki to try and give myself an idea of what I was aiming for and what I'd need to do in order to create this perfect Chao. The first consideration was color. In Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, there are 14 unique Chao colors. The only one here that really requires explanation is the regular color. This is the default Chao color that all Chao hatched from the initially spawned eggs come in. This color changes based on a few factors such as alignment, stage of life, and favored stat. I figured this was a pretty boring route to take, so I scrapped the idea of a regular color Chao almost immediately. Now, while deciding on a color, I also had a couple other considerations to make. Do I want this Chao to be monotone or two-tone? Do I want a hero, dark, or neutral Chao? Do I want a chaos Chao or a Chao who's mortal? Do I want this Chao to be shiny, jewel, or normal? Already there were a large number of considerations, and trying to choose one was going to take a lot more thought than first anticipated. I had pretty much already decided this Chao would be a hero chaos Chao, since they're easily my favorite design, just look at those ears. But I still had a few more considerations to make. Historically, shiny Chao have always been my favorite, but I've only ever had shiny monotone Chao. I've never gotten a shiny two-tone Chao before. However, when checking out these shiny Chao, I was kinda underwhelmed. The only ones who really looked cool were the dark alignment Chao, and those were generally my least favorite overall. Looking a bit deeper into the potential combinations, I discovered shiny jewel Chao. I had heard of these when I was a child, but I never really looked much into it because the concept seemed a little too complicated for me. These Chao have different appearances based on what version of the game you're playing. I won't get into all of it here since there's quite a bit to it, but after looking at a few different combinations, I think I eventually settled on the orange lemon Chao. He's a bit transparent, but that's okay because he's doing his best. Regardless, that was kind of far off. I still had a lot of work to do to even reach the point where I could breed Chao to get my orange lemon boy. One of the major things that still need to be taken care of with regards to raising this perfect Chao was acquiring the perfect all S rank skills. Chao come with 5 skills: swim, fly, run, power, and stamina. There are more that aren't visible and influence various things, but we won't worry about those for this video. They're really not that important anyway. Each one of these skills has a grade assigned to it that are randomly chosen when the Chao is hatched. Chao that are the result of breeding 2 already generated Chao will have their grades randomly chosen from their parents, and the only way to increase a Chao's grades is through evolution. When a Chao reaches its evolution stage, its most favored stat will go up by 1 grade unless that grade is already at S. With this knowledge, there were 2 routes I could take to make my perfect Chao. The first was straightforward and simple, but slightly risky and most of all time-consuming. When Chao reach the end of their lifetime, they either reincarnate or they simply die if they're too unhappy. Keeping a Chao happy in theory is pretty simple, so that wasn't much of a concern to me. However, the sheer amount of time it takes for a Chao to reincarnate makes this strategy not so viable. The wiki states that an adult Chao will have roughly 29 hours of life before dying or reincarnating. There are factors that influence this time heavily, and in my experience, my Chao tend to reincarnate every 15 hours. This meant, at best, I could get a Chao 1 extra grade every 15 or so hours of game time. Even if we started with all C's in every stat, that's still over 200 hours of playtime to get them all to S, and getting all C's is kind of optimistic. The second strategy was a little more complicated, but would be much quicker and practically risk-free: breeding Chao. This is an extremely complex system that involves alleles, dominant and recessive traits, and probably a spreadsheet to track all this info. This method would allow me to create my perfect S-rank Chao much quicker, while more than likely only requiring a few reincarnations. So the best option was a combination of the 2. I would breed Chao until I had a reasonably high set of grades, breed my orange lemon Chao and reincarnate him a few times to get the perfect S ranks, and then level up his stats so high that he'd be unbeatable. Reincarnation also has the added perk of retaining 10% of a Chao's points in a stat, which would allow me to nearly reach the soft cap of 3,266 points in every stat after a lot of reincarnations. This Chao would be so insanely good at every possible activity he would never lose any race or karate match. So that's the goal. Over the next few weeks, I would work on creating the best orange lemon Chao in the world, but first I had a major journey to undertake. I've never collected every emblem in Sonic Adventure 2 battle. Doing so is a time-consuming and painful process. Losing a decent run of crazy gadgets 6 minutes in with the goal in sight, getting just under the required points on Final Chase for the 4th time in a row, dying 100 times as Tails and Eggman, sometimes it can really suck. I grew up with Sonic Adventure 2, as I've mentioned before, and it wasn't until I speedran the game for a while that I feel I developed the skills necessary to clear every stage and every mission with every character with an A rank. This video isn't really about Sonic Adventure 2 Battle as a game, but there are a couple stages that really frustrated me that I wanted to talk about real quick. You have your standard difficult stages such as Metal Harbor and Skyrail, which require a lot of precision to A rank. Eternal Engine, which is filled with annoying mechanics that are absolutely desperate to end your run. All the emerald collecting stages, which can be very annoying if you aren't fully and totally familiar with each stage, and not to mention the hard mode missions, which are basically, hey, we added a bunch of really unfair and annoyingly placed enemies to the stage layout. It really didn't take as long as I thought it would, especially after the 100+ hours I spent on Borderlands 1 doing basically nothing and waiting for RNG. This was a nice change of pace. A few more stages that really gave me problems were Final Rush, which took a lot of attempts but really wasn't too hard, and Crazy Gadget, which was pretty bad. The hard mode mission lasted about 6 minutes for an average run, and this stage has a large amount of potential for that classic Sonic Adventure 2 jank. Green Forest was an interesting one. Most of the missions weren't a big deal, but I had a surprising amount of trouble with the Lost Chao mission. For some reason, the platforms you summon using Mystic Melody are at the absolute maximum height possible using the bounce bracelet, and I honestly died to this 5 or so times before I managed to figure it out and get it. Pretty much every Knuckles and Rouge stage gave me trouble on the 100 Rings mission. I basically had to look up how to A-rank these missions for every single stage because I just couldn't figure it out myself. Same goes for the Tails and Eggman stages. Speaking of Tails and Eggman, I've realized that the mech gameplay is kinda not my favorite thing in the world. I guess if you're a really practiced speedrunner, you could obviously cut off a few minutes on most, if not all, stages, which would make it much more bearable, but the above average to skilled player such as myself doesn't enjoy such luxuries. The majority of these stages don't feel difficult per se, but they're slow, and the primary mechanics of the mech can be janky. Locking onto targets sometimes just doesn't happen, and coupled with the fact that your Vulcan cannon can kill enemies accidentally, you often miss out on combo points, which just makes it that little bit harder to A-rank. Not to mention, even if you get the full 11 target combo, if you take damage while you're firing the lock-on missiles, you won't receive the bonus points. It's a very annoying, messy system that really just makes for a bad time. My best advice for these stages is to take it slow. If you try to rush through it without being fully familiar with every single aspect of the stage, you will take a lot of damage, lose out on combo points, and ultimately die a lot more than you would if you played it safe. That was kind of a long rant about the mech stages, but they were really annoying. There's really not much else to mention here. Janky mechanics alone are enough to turn people off from the game, but when you try to 100% it, you're not only trying to be perfect, but you're also competing against the jank, and it's frustrating when a lot of the deaths are completely out of your control. Anyway, despite all my complaints, which is basically what this whole chapter was, collecting all the emblems was a pretty satisfying experience overall. I obviously had my problems with the stages that I mentioned, but the vast majority of stages really weren't so bad. It was a nice challenge, even if a few instances were a little rougher than others. Now, on to the Chao. Before even hatching the initial Chao, I went ahead and checked what group of items we got in the black market. For those of you who may be unaware of how the black market functions, there are 3 sets of colored eggs that the black market can sell. 2 of these will be rolled randomly when the Chao Garden is generated, and those 2 sets will be the only 2 sets ever sold in that save file. Luckily, one of the 2 sets we rolled included the orange egg, which is one of the things we need to create the Chao that I wanted. So hey, good news. Interestingly, there's a bug in the PC re-release where set number 2, pink, purple, and yellow eggs, never appears, though I'm assuming this is fixed with the extended Chao Garden mod. Next step was getting rings. I had already collected a lot of these during my 171 emblem run, so I just needed a few hundred more for what I had in mind. There were plenty of ways to do this, but I figured I'd take this opportunity to go over my favorite ring farming method that I discovered from a speedrunner many years ago. This method allows you to collect 100 rings every 40 seconds or so if done optimally. It's kinda hard to explain, but it's such a short and quick method that you can just watch this clip and figure it out pretty easily on your own. The second method involved obtaining an expensive item, in this case the shiny lime green egg or the black wool beanie. The shiny lime green egg would cost 15,000 rings and the black wool beanie would cost 20,000 rings. Since the black market refreshes its stock every 3 to 7 minutes of game time and the items it restocks are random, I went ahead and just farmed mad space some more while waiting for one of these to appear. Eventually, a shiny lime green egg showed up, and I was able to begin farming rings en masse. This exploit method is really simple. Get the item you want to sell it in the black market, and reset the console before saving the Chao Garden. This will retain the rings you acquire from the sale as well as the item itself, effectively giving you a source of infinite rings. This works because the save data for the Chao Garden, including all the items, is separate from the save data for the rest of the game. When you sell an item, the updated ring count is immediately written to the main game save, but the Chao Garden data is not saved until you manually save and exit the area. This works the other way around too. If you buy something in the Chao Garden and then reset without saving, you will have lost the rings and the purchase item will disappear as well. So don't do that. Note that the writing of the ring count is not permanent until you force a save of the main game file. My method of doing this is to do a run of any stage, since the main data saves at the end of every stage on the stats screen. There's also the option of simply exiting the Chao Garden, because that seems to save the main game data as well as the Chao Garden data. I don't know if these are the only two ways to force a save, but they're the only ones that I figured out. Anyway, the shiny lime green egg sells for 4,000 rings, and the black wool beanie sells for 5,000. As far as I can tell, the black wool beanie is the highest value item we can reasonably access. I read that there are some Chao eggshells in the files that are worth way more, but I don't think you can get those legitimately. To keep things simple, I wanted all my Chao to be shiny orange so that creating my lemon Chao would be a straightforward task when the time came. Each shiny orange Chao egg costs 6,000 rings, and I probably wouldn't need more than a few to get started. The other cost would come from the heart fruit, which costs 300 rings apiece, as well as another expense later on that I'll cover when the time comes. I came to the conclusion that having around 200,000 rings would be more than enough for this whole journey, so that's where I stopped. Besides, even if I were to somehow blow through all these rings, getting them back wouldn't exactly be difficult. Turns out, getting a shiny orange egg to appear in the black market is a lot harder than one would think. I spent probably 2 or so hours just waiting around checking every so often before I got even one to show up. I really couldn't figure out a way around the black market refresh timer, so I had no other option besides waiting. I eventually got a second one, a third one, and a fourth one, and then decided that this was sufficient because I really didn't want to wait around longer to get started raising Chao. I got the eggs all hatched and went to get their stats checked. Turns out I got a pretty solid first roll. Tommy's stats are good enough that he could probably clear all the Chao races and Chao Karate on his own, to be honest. The rest of the Chao were pretty solid as well, and we already got ourselves 2 S-rank stats in our gene pool, Swim and Power. Or at least we'll have these skills at S-rank once these Chao evolve. The next step was actually getting them to evolve. As I mentioned before, each Chao can have 1 stats grade raised per evolution, so it was time to decide which grades we'd be raising on which Chao. For Pebbles and Hannah, the answer was pretty straightforward, Swim and Power respectively, giving us 2 S ranks after their evolution. For Tommy, I decided to go with Run to bring it up to A rank, and since Cosmo's only B rank stat is Fly, that will be the grade that I raise on him. And now we need to collect the animals to influence their type. I decided to make 2 of these Chao Dark type and 2 of these Chao Hero type. There is no issue breeding Chao of different alignments, and I wanted to unlock all the Chao Gardens, so for Tommy and Pebbles I'd be raising them with Rouge, and Cosmo and Hannah are going to be raised with Tails. Figuring out which animals to get and where to get them was pretty straightforward. In the GameCube games, the animals will always give the same amount of stat, so it was a matter of finding out which animals gave the most in the stat I wanted and farming a lot of those. Starting with Hannah, we needed to collect otters. The fastest way to get otters is through Tails' stage Prison Lane. I grabbed a full inventory, and I guess now is as good a time as any to go over the most obvious exploit that any Chao enthusiast will be familiar with. If you place an animal or a Chaos Drive the proper distance away from a Chao, the Chao will receive the stats and effects of the animal without actually consuming it. This can be used to reach max stats very quickly, and in our case will make raising these first few generations of Chao much quicker. Using the Infinite Animal exploit, I decided I was going to raise all of the Chao's respective stats to 20 to pretty much guarantee their typing upon evolution. Hannah went by quickly and became a huge fan of swimming. Next up was Cosmo, and the best animal for raising Fly quickly is the Condor, which can be farmed easily from Eternal Engine. I repeated the same steps as I did with Hannah, and Cosmo was quickly ready to become the Flying Master. He was pretty sleepy throughout, and I had to wake him up a couple times to finish handing him all the animals. In the end, though, he did get his nap. Now we're on to Tommy, who is going to be Run type. There were two options for Run type animals that both give the same amount of stat: cheetahs and rabbits. I decided to go with rabbits because it literally takes under 3 seconds to grab one from Cosmic Wall. How are these animals surviving out here in space anyway? Last up for this first generation of Chao is Pebbles. Pebbles is going to be a power type Chao, so that means we need gorillas. Again, a very easy animal to farm quickly. Now we just have to wait. The Chao will play around, explore, eat when they get hungry, and eventually evolve. In the meantime, here's a supercut of some Chao footage.
The Chao are living prehistoric creatures. They adapt to the environment very well.
Hello.
About 3 hours later, the first Chao to evolve was Pebbles. Her evolution gave us our first solid S tier to work with. Hannah followed shortly after, resulting in an S tier swim gene. After Hannah came Tommy, who gave us an A tier run gene, and finally Cosmo evolved, giving us an A tier fly gene. Now that the first generation Chao were all adults, it was time to get their best stats bred together to create the first offspring. Unfortunately for me, this meant more waiting for the black market to refresh its stock. We need a few heart fruits, so I had to wait around once again until they were available for purchase. It didn't take too long, and once I grabbed as many as I could, it was time for Chao breeding. The first step was getting Hannah and Pebbles S tiers together on one Chao. It took a lot of attempts, but eventually we rolled a naive Chao who had an S in swim and an S in power. I named him Kevin. Kevin is our first second generation Chao. And now we move on to creating another second generation Chao. Now we're looking to get a Chao that has A tier run and A tier fly by breeding Cosmo and Tommy. This one took even longer than Kevin, but eventually we got the role we needed. I wanted to name this one DoorDash, but you can only put up to 7 letters in a Chao name, so this is what his name looks like. Things were already looking good for us. We can give Kevin a boost to his stamina, putting him up to B tier, and DoorDash can get a boost to either flying or run. Looking at the genotypes that these Chao have, boosting fly would be better so that I can get it out of the way quicker. So this means it's time to go gather some more condors for DoorDash. We know how to boost a Chao's grade in a skill as long as that skill is swim, fly, run, or power, but how do we boost a stamina grade for Kevin? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. We kinda just give him no animals or chaos drives at all. As long as his typing is neutral, he'll evolve into a normal type Chao, which will boost his stamina by 1 tier. The easiest way to keep everything balanced is to let it stay at its initial 0 values. I gave DoorDash the condors and it was time to wait for them to evolve. You can force evolution pretty quickly by feeding them over and over, but time really wasn't a concern to me, so I just waited. It usually takes around 2 to 3 hours for a Chao to evolve naturally, so that gave me some time to work on other things. Eventually, DoorDash evolved, but for some reason, Kevin refused to eat and I had to feed him in order to get him to evolve. The next step was breeding these two together to hopefully get the best combination of all of their stats. This is where the first major RNG grind came into play. To be honest, I wasn't really sure how phenotypes and genotypes worked at this point when I was breeding these Chao. I wasn't sure if they were inherited from the parents or if they were based entirely on phenotypes or what was going on. It was all kind of pretty complicated, and I just decided to go for it. The perfect third generation Chao would have the grades of S, S, A, S, and B. I did some quick math and got a result of 1 in 450 eggs having the above perfect stats, which I don't think is correct. I don't think that's how the RNG works in this instance. So I said screw the math and just grinded it out, this time keeping track of my resets to see exactly how long it would take to get the perfect third generation Chao. It only took 15 eggs to get a nearly perfect third generation Chao. Unfortunately, Trinity managed to inherit the worst possible stamina grade from her grandmother, Pebbles. At this point, we were at the end of our first family tree. We had managed to breed an SSASE Chao without any inbreeding, and now it was time to start another family tree. This time, however, things were a lot simpler. All we needed to do was get S-rank stamina. Trinity's first evolution will get her to S-rank run no problem, so all that was left was getting stamina taken care of, and we technically don't even need it to be the perfect S-rank. My potential perfect Chao will have to reincarnate a few times in order to reach the highest stats, as well as to turn him into a Chaos Chao, so if I utilize these reincarnations to raise its stamina grade, I can settle for B or even C tier stamina. Starting a new family tree meant I needed more freshly generated eggs from the black market. The plan this time was to grab 2 and hope that either one of them gets a good stamina roll, or that I can breed them together to create a stamina grade that would be acceptable. In the meantime, let's get Trinity's run grade up to S. As you know, this simply involves getting more rabbits and leveling her run stat to 20, just like we've done before. Now it was back to the old waiting game. Waiting for the shiny orange egg to appear in the black market. So far, after buying about 6 of these, I'm thinking they actually tend to appear at a fairly consistent rate. I'm not sure how RNG is calculated in this game, but overall it seems to be performing in a way I wouldn't expect, specifically when it comes to breeding Chao. Anyway, I got the 2 shiny orange eggs I needed and checked out their stats. Of course, the first one, who I named Useless, had E tier stamina. Go figure, this Chao serves no purpose. At least the second one, who I named Dino, had B tier stamina, which is more than good enough. Now we wait again. It took them all 3 hours to evolve, and surprisingly, we're already near the end of the breeding segment of this video. All that was left to do was breed Trinity with Dino and get the SSSSA stats. I figured this would take a while to achieve, so I decided to track the resets again. Turns out, it only took 15 resets, just like last time. I named this Chao Euro. Really quickly, I want to mention how easy it seems to be to roll the best stats on baby Chao. With my limited understanding of math and genetics as they pertain to this game, I'm guessing there's some sort of bias towards higher stat grades that make them appear more often. This is good news, but I can only empirically confirm this since I haven't done extensive testing and I also don't have the source code for the game. Maybe I just got extremely lucky. Anyway, we're going to have to breed for the perfect Chao one last time, but right now we have a different goal to achieve. I briefly mentioned shiny Jewel Chao, but I never talked about exactly how they were created. A shiny Jewel Chao is made by breeding a shiny Chao, such as one of our mini orange Chao, and any Jewel Chao. But we don't have a Jewel Chao, so how do we get one? Well, there are 2 ways to obtain Jewel Chao. The first is through the Tiny Chao Garden. This requires a copy of a Game Boy Advance game that has the Tiny Chao Garden in it. I don't own any of these games, so that idea was scrapped immediately. The other, more accessible way for me was to get one of the Jewel eggs from Sonic Adventure DX and transfer that, so that's what I did. If you've ever played Sonic Adventure 1, you've more than likely seen at least one of these eggs laying around, most likely the one in Station Square since it's the most apparent. I didn't have any save data, so I had to play a little bit in order to get access to the Jewel egg. The easiest one and quickest one to acquire was the Silver Jewel egg from the Mystic Ruins, so I grabbed it, transferred the Chao to my Game Boy Advance, and then for my Game Boy Advance, she made her way to the Chao Garden in Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. You can do this even without a copy of the Tiny Chao Garden. The joys of the GBA to GameCube link cable. Checking the Jewel Chao's stats, she was a BDDBB Chao, which would prove to be a reasonably high set of stats for the breeding RNG when the time came. I named her Mel. Time to wait once more for Mel and Euro to evolve, and then we can create the ultimate Chao. After getting them to the adult stage, it only took 2 attempts to get the perfect roll, and now we have our all S rank Chao. His name is Tennis. And now, it's on to the final step. Gotta let this dude evolve first, though. The highest stats that can legitimately be obtained in the vanilla unmodified game is 3,266. The tiny Chao Garden does things a little bit differently, which ultimately allows for a maximum stat value of 3,375. Since I didn't actually have a copy of the tiny Chao Garden or even a reliable way to record it at the moment if I did own one of the games, we're going to have to settle for 3266, or at least close to it. So how do we go about this? Well, every time a Chao levels up in a stat, assuming that stat's grade is S, they will receive anywhere from 26 to 30 points. These values are weighted equally, so each one has a 1 in 5 chance of appearing. Theoretically, we would need to get perfect rolls on every single level in every single skill for 4 reincarnations in order to reach max stats. That is a 1 in 5 chance on all 5 skills, 393 times each, for a total of 1,965 levels of perfect rolls. Doing some math, this will essentially require 10,000 resets on average. So for the sake of my sanity, we'll call anything over 3,000 stat perfect. There's absolutely no way a Chao with stats that high would lose any race or karate match anyway, so it's functionally perfect. Regardless of the RNG I got, this would absolutely require me to reincarnate Tennis at least 2 or 3 times in order to reach that though. I knew this would be a huge undertaking, but since everything else in this video had been so easy up until this point, something difficult and or tedious was inevitable, and this is it. I spent a bit of time resetting for the perfect 30 stat increases every level, but quickly realized that this was way beyond unreasonable and decided to just hope for the best by rolling the dice. However, one thing to note. Since stats are divided by 10 upon reincarnation and rounded down, and there's a hard limit of 30 points max per level, reincarnations receive diminishing returns starting from reincarnation number 2, and it's a steep fall off. Reincarnation number 1 put Tennis's stats up to the following values from 0. Assuming we get average RNG and roll 27.5 for 98 level ups, which adds up to 2,695, reincarnation number 2 will put Tennis at the following values. Keep in mind we lose out on 1 level since a reincarnation puts the Chao stats at level 1 instead of 0. As you can see, the stat gains from reincarnation number 1 were around 270 or so on average, while the stat gains from reincarnation number 2 were about 20 on average. Just to illustrate this point further, if we simulate reincarnation number 3 with average stat increases as well, we get the following values. An overall stat gain of 2 in every skill. Beyond this, we actually don't even gain anything more, assuming we get average RNG. That being said, 2 points is not very significant and can easily be overcome with a couple resets for good rolls, so I was going to shoot for 2 reincarnations and a few high rolls to put my Chao stats just above 3,000. The best method for raising all of a Chao's stats quickly actually doesn't even involve animals at all. Initially, I thought this would be the best option, but we run into one major problem, which is stamina. A Chao's stamina can only be increased via fruits, with the fruits you find on the trees in the gardens giving 10% of a level per bite. There are other fruits that give more, but they're usually not easily accessible in mass quantities, and I did a bit of research to find out what would give me the best rate of leveling. Eventually, I decided that Chao fruit was the best for overall growth, since it gives 12% of a level in every single skill per bite, with the last bite granting 14% of a level. You have to feed a Chao a lot to get its stamina up to 99, and it didn't make sense to spend time leveling up my Chao's other stats to 99 beforehand, since they would all level at the same rate with Chao fruit. Turns out this is also where the majority of my rings were spent. Each of these fruits is 200 rings apiece, and I had to use nearly 800, which ended up basically wiping out the rest of my ring savings. I had to do this 4 separate times, 1 for every reincarnation, plus 1 more after he evolves into a Chaos Chao, and at roughly 3 to 4 hours to get from 1 to 99, I ended up spending nearly 15 hours just leveling up stats. It was quite tedious. Speaking of Chaos Chao, one thing I haven't gone over yet that will very quickly become relevant are the steps required to make your Chao immortal. Up until this point, I've been doing everything properly, but after the second reincarnation and reaching max stats on Tennis, it was time to move on to the next and final step, giving him one of every animal. Before we get to that, let me quickly outline the process of creating a Chaos Chao. There are a few requirements that must be met in order for a Chao to evolve into a Chaos Chao, the first of which being a minimum of 2 reincarnations. The next requirement is that it must have learned every unique animal's behavior, which effectively means giving them one of every animal. It must have a normal typing as well. This means it cannot be swim, fly, run, or power type. It must be a child, but its alignment can be whichever you choose. Once you give the baby Chao at least one of every animal, when it evolves into an adult, it will become immortal and you have the unique appearance that each Chaos Chao gets. This is where we're at now. I accidentally left my Wii on too long and my Chao ended up going through an extra reincarnation, which ended up wasting some time. This really wasn't that big of a deal, just a few more hours spent feeding Tennis Chao fruits, which did kinda suck, but once he was immortal and had 3,000 stats in every skill, all that was left to do was the races and the karate matches and watch as Tennis destroyed everyone with ease. It was a pretty long grind getting this Chao made. I managed to collect all 171 non-Chao related emblems as well, which is something else I've wanted to do since I was a kid. The Chao grind was pretty time consuming though. After collecting 171 emblems, I was at roughly 17 hours of playtime, which I think is pretty solid. However, by the time Tennis was immortal and at level 99 in every skill, I had around 112 hours of playtime. I'll be honest, the majority of that time was spent idling, waiting for him to get older. I'd say the actual playtime was closer to 40 or 50 hours. I spent a grand total of about 220,000 rings on this Chao. However, I did use 200 more Chao fruit than was necessary, so you can probably reduce that number by about 40,000 rings to get a real estimate of how long it would take ideally. I bred a total of 10 Chao to get the desired all S rank results, and didn't resort to inbreeding one single time, which was another little side goal I had. I thought avoiding inbreeding would actually make this process a lot harder and time consuming, but really it was still super easy to get all S ranks. This video began production on February 1st, 2022, and was completed on February 27th, 2022. I could have probably done this a lot faster, but I ran into some production problems towards the beginning, which I wasn't able to resolve for a while. But that about does it for this video. At some point in the future, I wouldn't mind revisiting the Chao Garden, maybe to tackle another fun Chao related challenge or something, but for now, I'm gonna move on to other things. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, a like is appreciated, and feel free to subscribe for future challenge videos similar to this one, whether they be Sonic related or not. If you're feeling extra generous, you could support me on Patreon. There's not much there now, but I have plenty of future plans for it. Either way, I hope to see you in the next video.